Welcome to this special podcast interview with Quinton Hennigh. He's the president and CEO of Novo Resources. Novo Resources trades in Canada under the symbol NVO. You can buy it down here in the States, as I have, under the symbol NSRPF. Latest share price that I saw was around 57 cents US. There's 61.8 million shares outstanding, giving it a market cap of around $35 million. Well, I'm doing this special podcast with Quinton Hennigh today for at least three reasons. First of all, it is my favorite exploration story, in part because the prospects appear good, I believe, for early cash flow from Novo Resources. And I like companies that can grow organically, companies that can go out and generate cash flow and build a company from the bottom up, rather than having to go out and raise capital repeatedly and diluting the shareholders, especially those that went in early into a story. They tend to get hosed, really, quite frankly. People don't do as well with those kind of companies, the early investors, and then the people that come later reap the rewards. Well, I think that Novo Resources has the chance of building value early on, from what I can see. So that's first and foremost. Secondly, it is, I think, a most fascinating story, exploration story, because it appears as though Novo's Beaton Creek prospect in northwestern Australia is a geological look-alike with the most fantastic gold discovery in history, that being the Witwatersrand of South Africa. I'm not saying that this is a duplicate or that there's anything like that amount of gold there, but at least from a geological perspective, there are striking similarities. And last but not least, several listeners have requested an update on Novo, so Quinton has graciously agreed to spend some time providing an update for our listeners. I should note that for the benefit of those of you who may not have heard past interviews that I've had with Dr. Hennigh, you can listen to them at Novo's website. I believe most, if not all of them, are posted there at novoresources.com or at jtaylormedia.com. And you can also, I would suggest that you go to novoresources.com to learn, if you're curious about the geological story, that you go there to learn more about that as well. Welcome, Quinton. It's really good to have you with me again. Thanks for spending your time with us.
Oh, thank you, Jay.
You know, we've spent a lot of time in past interviews in which you did explain your views on the formation of the Witwatersrand and how that caused you to set out to look for a similar geological environment, which it seems as though you have found in northwestern Australia. And I would suggest again to my listeners that they go to your website and educate themselves about this, because it is a fascinating story, even for people who aren't geologists like myself. Just to sort of understand, it's just a fascinating story about the formation, going back into the early stages of Earth's history. It is really quite interesting. But today, Quinton, I would like to update our listeners on the exploration progress that you've made to date and what your plans are for Beaton's Creek, which is just one of many such prospects, as I understand it, in the basin where you've, this general geological area. So, first of all, I would like to ask you, recently you put down a deep hole. I think the Australian government financed part of it. What the results of that seem to disappoint some people in the market. I think people that were expecting perhaps you're going to find a quote-unquote mother lode suddenly, and the first drill hole you put down was going to be something miraculous. But you were not so disappointed with that deep hole and the results of it. Could you tell our listeners a little bit about what the purpose of that hole was and what information you gained from it that is of value to Novo Resources?
Yeah, sure thing, Jay. The deep hole is really the first stratigraphic test of the basin, the deeper part of the basin. There's been no drilling that deep in that area before. We drilled a few kilometers southwest, southwest of the resource that we have at Beaton's Creek. So, this was truly a wildcat hole. The hole reached a depth of nearly a kilometer. It was 900 and some odd meters down.
Wow.
And we hit the same conglomerate horizons that we see at Beaton's Creek at, a depth around 550, 570 meters, somewhere in there. Mm-hmm. And what's striking is you think about the lateral continuity for a bed to extend out in that direction that far. It's pretty striking. Alluvial deposits don't do that. Alluvial deposits like creeks and rivers and whatnot, they deposit gold and gravels in a fairly restricted environment. You're not going to see that kind of lateral continuity. So, firstly, I think the hole does demonstrate that these conglomerates do have that extensive lateral continuity. And the second thing I would add to that is that, yes, the grades were, kind of 0.x gram, okay? Not ore grade by any stretch. But if the listeners here would go to a news release I put out on, I believe it was April 21st, I discuss some of the issues around sampling conglomerates. And if you can imagine a drill hole, this is a hole that's only a couple inches diameter, going down, it's more or less going to hit what it hits. Okay, it's not going to, you can't be guaranteed to hit matrix or cobbles or whatever. This one happened to hit what I believe is mostly cobbles as opposed to matrix. We see the same phenomena up in the shallower areas where we have drill holes, literally twin drill holes right next to each other. One will hit a meter of, say, a gram, and one will hit a meter of 10 grams. It's just, it's how it's the nature of the rock, how it's distributed through the rock itself. And I would suggest people, educate themselves by looking at a diagram I put into that April 21st news release.
Well, certainly you're seeing that with the sort of continuity and also the disparity between one drill hole and the next in the shallower reefs, which is where your focus is now. And as at Witwatersrand in South Africa, gold mineralization does occur in these reefs. I understand from our previous discussion that the mineralogy is very similar to what you find at the Witwatersrand. And those reefs occur in layers, but you're really focusing on the layer that's within a couple of meters, I think a few meters at least, or maybe 10 or 20 meters of the surface, oxidized layers. Can you talk about the factors that look favorable for developing a low-cost, high-margin gold mining operation at Beaton's Creek? There's a whole host of things that you've mentioned in press releases in the past that seem to be very positive for an early, low-cost, high-margin operation. Could you perhaps tell our listeners a little bit about what some of those factors are?
Yeah, you bet. I mean, this is really what's truly exciting about this project at the moment. We're focused on the low-hanging fruit, if you will, and it's where these reefs come to surface. So you're right; they're within a few meters to maybe up to 15, 20 meters below surface. So in an environment that can be easily mined. Okay, we're not talking about a deep open pit, or certainly not underground here. We have done a little test work, in terms of earthworks. We do not think we will need to drill and blast this material. We can strip the overburden. It's quite soft, cuts like butter, okay? We can rip it with a bulldozer, push the material that overlies the reef off to the side, and then we can mine the reef very selectively with very little dilution in a small, think of it like a tabletop mine, like you'd see a coal mine in West Virginia, say. Yep. So we are very excited about this. Now, the oxide material, the gold occurs in the matrix of the conglomerate. So when we mine the conglomerates, what we found is that the matrix material breaks away from the boulders. This is also quite interesting, because that means we could potentially screen out the boulders. The big quartz boulders are barren. And if we screen those out, when it comes time to mill or undergo combination here, we're looking at a lot less power and a significant upgrade in the grade of the material that we're feeding into the plant. So there's just all sorts of pluses here. On top of that, we have what appears to be demonstrably very good gravity recovery. So we're looking at very cheap processing, very cheap mining, very cheap milling.
Now, Quinton, you are doing a lot of work, because I know one of the biggest risks you've mentioned to me in the past is one of knowing what your grade is, because of the characteristics of the rock that you just talked about. You've been doing some, what I would call channel sampling. I think you use a little different word for it. But you've been taking samples across these reefs, I believe, recently. And what are you finding with respect to average grades from those channel samples? Because you need a bigger sample given the nature of this of the gold occurrences, right?
Yes, you do. And the channel samples, we call them costines. Costine is just a fancy word for a trench along which mineralization is sampled, or trench that cuts mineralization. Okay, it's a way to sample that gives you a better representation than, say, a 5-inch drill hole. Okay, you're opening up a face of material, and in this case, we're opening up the face across, say, a meter of width, which gives us the ability to sample in a more representative fashion. And what we found from our costines, and we released those. I think we released something like 300 or 400 of those between a news release in April 21st and then another one April 29th. We find that the grades in the costines appear to be significantly higher than the grades we've seen in some of our drill holes. Now, not all of our drill holes. Like I said, the drill holes show a lot of variability, and it relates to whether that hole encountered mostly boulders or encountered matrix. With the costines, we're seeing a lot more continuity or consistency, rather. We see this similar grades from place to place as we go along strike on the costine, and that's because we're getting the entire face of material. We're getting the boulders and the matrix and everything into the sample. We're taking very large samples. They are usually on the order of 50 kilograms, so I consider them bulk samples. And they tell us, I think, for at least the first pass here, what we should expect in terms of a grade in a small mine here.
And I know, of course, this is to be expected, but you've had some spectacular grades along with those that aren't so high, but some of them are really very spectacular, but this is what you would expect. So what you're doing, potentially screening out the boulders, and then meaning that you could have even higher grades potentially going into the mill. Now, you're free milling. It's free milling gold, as I understand it, for the most part. You've been able to early metallurgical tests have shown relatively high recoveries with just simple gravity, and then with flotation you get something in the 90% area, I think, right?
Correct. Yeah, and we're doing some work right now. We've got some test work that I expect back in the next couple of weeks, looking at optimizing gravity recovery. So, knock wood, we expect to see greater than 80%, say, going straight into a gravity concentrate, which could be smelted on site. And then we think we can get kind of a tertiary or secondary recovery using flotation. It's not complex flotation like you'd see in a sulfide mill. This is simply a flotation unit that would scavenge a bit of the finer gold that didn't get collected in the gravity circuit. So it might bump us above 90%. But, those numbers aren't fast yet. We'll see what they come back with, and it'll also give us a very good idea of what kind of mill and costs we should expect to build, a process plant.
Right, and of course it's early days yet, so we can't really talk about numbers. But the point of this metallurgy is that it looks like a simple process that should be relatively low capital cost. And again, we don't have any numbers, and we want to caution our listeners not to jump to any conclusions yet, but keep your eye on it, because from what I can see, these are factors that are very, very positive with potential economics. Do you have a time frame in mind, Quinton, in terms of possibly actually starting some production?
Yes, we've explored all aspects of permitting. We've actually done a lot of the work. Okay, one of the things I tried to point out in a recent news release is that we've done a lot of our environmental work. We've collected data that's necessary for permitting. We've looked at the timelines for building a plant, for building, the site development and all sorts of things. And we think we can accomplish this within, say, the next 12 to 18 months. We're fairly confident, say, a year from now, maybe a little more, that we could have something in operation here. But, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to get there.
Yeah, for sure. I think you mentioned a couple of the major risks, and we've sort of touched on one, perhaps, and that is the risk of grade and grade control, and knowing what your grade is. Mining dilution, which I think you figure is going to be relatively low, should be relatively low, but again, we'll know more as the project progresses. You also mentioned the risk in a previous discussion of water. Water in northwestern Australia, of course, it's desert area. What can you tell our listeners about water at this time?
Well, we've actually drilled some test bores. We're drilling right now, putting in some monitor holes as well as holes that we could potentially source water, and we found several of them generate the kind of water we need. We need roughly about 12 to 20 liters per second, and we've hit a few holes here appear to generate that level of water. So we're not too concerned about sourcing water at this point. I think we're good.
Okay, now, what should listeners, investors be looking forward to for your company now in the immediate future, let's say over the next several months? What are the drivers that might get people more interested in your story?
Yeah, sure. So in the kind of the short term, by short term I mean the next couple of months, we have more assay data coming back from our drill holes. If you recall, I talked about the need for size of sample.
Mm-hmm.
Going back now and reanalyzing select samples, these would be samples that contain appreciable gold, and we're going through a full processing where we actually analyze a 3-kilo charge. And those results, which are coming back now, should give us a better handle on the grades in the drill holes. All right, so yeah, aside from the variability that we see from drill hole to drill hole, they will give us good numbers. Once we have all that data in hand, which the lab is telling me sometime late June, then we will go ahead and put our resource model together. We've actually collected all the survey points out in the field, so we've surveyed the tops and bottoms of the reef on a very, very tight scale. So every few meters we take a survey of the top and the bottom, and we've now modeled in wireframe, we've modeled the entire reef system in the oxide environment right there at the Beaton's Creek area. So we know very well right now where these reefs are. We know how they dip into the ground, how much we expect to get into oxide and so forth. All we need to do at this point is to occupy the model with the grades, and then we should be able to come out with the resource, say, sometime in July, perhaps the latter half of July.
You recently announced the hiring of a mining engineer, which tells me that you are serious about moving forward towards some sort of production. Can you talk about this gentleman that you just hired and what his background is?
Yes, Simon Pooley is the fellow you've mentioned. He developed several mines in Australia over the past few years. He's got a very good career building mines of this scale. Simon actually built Millennium's mine, which is just across the road from us and down about 8 kilometers. So it's the nearby gold operation. It's on an orogenic gold system, different type of system. Anyway, Simon built that back in, I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago. It's a 4,000 ton a day operation. He built it on time and within budget. I think the project had a budget of $86 million, and they built it for precisely $86 million. Simon is well respected across Australia. Everybody that knows him knows he's a very capable hand. He knows the locals. He knows the Aboriginals. You know, he has a good rapport with everybody. So he's just a fantastic fit for us.
Well, it's very important. You mentioned his that project being 4,000 tons per day. I know it's early yet to talk about this, perhaps, but do you have a sense of the scale of what you might do initially in terms of daily tonnage?
Yeah, we've looked at, I think I've even said it in a couple of news releases last year, that we're looking at something around 1,000 to 1,500 tons, so smaller than, you know, Millennium's plant for sure. But you know, there's a few variables here, Jay. Remember, when I'm talking about tons, I'm talking about processed tons. And if we can knock out boulders,
exactly,
and material, you know, that's where we don't quite have a number yet. You know, we don't know if we can knock out, say, 50% of the boulders and be able to, you know, to mine at the pit level, say twice of that, and then, you know, upgrade the material. And so that number will come with time.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly right. And of course, if you can get rid of, you know, 50% of the material that doesn't contain gold before you put it in the mill, I mean, what a
exactly.
boost to profitability that would be. Now, I believe you own 100% of Beaton's Creek project, right? Is that right now?
We do. We bought 3 mining leases from Millennium. Now, we were in joint venture with the Millennium on those. The mining leases, the joint venture required us to reach bankable feasibility to complete our earn-in for 70%. By buying out these mining leases, we now own those 100%, and we're free to move this forward in a less restrictive environment, and quite frankly, much quicker and cheaper. So, yeah, it costs some money to buy those tenements, but I feel it was an incredibly good deal for us, both in terms of cost, and it does save us a lot of time and money to advance the project.
Yeah, I can understand that. Well, if I would really, again, encourage listeners and investors to go to the website and look at the PowerPoint presentation and other material that's there. There's a map there that shows Beaton's Creek among numerous other areas that are identified in the basin that I believe, Quinton, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you believe that I believe that you have the potential to find similar sorts of gold deposits.
Yes, correct. We see other potential in the Nullagine Basin, but we also see some up the Marble Bar Basin. If readers or listeners go back through news releases, say December 10th, I believe, last year, I talked about a new discovery in an area at Marble Bar called Virgin Creek. We found a reef 600 meters long, took samples up to, I think, 6 or 7 grams per ton. Looks just like the reefs at Beaton's Creek. I mean, this is what's exciting.
Yeah, it is exciting. So while you might be starting out small on your first prospect and your first at Beaton's Creek, numerous other possibilities for near-surface oxidized reefs, perhaps. And now, do you expect? I imagine your focus right now, though, is on Beaton's Creek, moving that forward, getting some cash flow out of that, then using that cash flow potentially to develop some of these other areas.
Absolutely. We see potential for the sulfide that's down dip from the oxide of Beaton's Creek. We see potential in the deeper environment. We also want to get to Marble Bar and start exploring the reefs that we see at Virgin Creek, at Contact Creek, over on the east side of the basin near a mine called the Tassie Queen Mine. There's a lot of targets we want to follow up, and it's really critical that we get that cash flow and build this, like you said, organically.
Yeah, absolutely important to me, and there aren't that many companies out there doing it. There are a couple on my list in my newsletter that I really like. It's like the advertisement, I think it was E.F. Hutton that said, "We earn money the old-fashioned way, we earn it." And I think what Quinton is doing and a couple of others in my newsletter that I really revere is not the get-rich-quick story, although this is relatively quick, the way it looks. So we'll see how it works out. But the notion that you build wealth honestly, and you're not out there trying to get rich quick by raising a bunch of money, putting a few drill holes down, and flogging off a property to some major. But Quinton is in the process of building this up from the bottom up, and really, it's the sort of story I like, and I really find it very interesting. It is just really interesting, of course, from a geological perspective. This model, Quinton, that you've come up with, it's really outside of the mainstream. Perhaps there will be more believers in time. We shall see. But very interesting. Anything else you'd like to share with us today before we conclude this discussion?
Well, I would say that I'd encourage people to look at our progress. We're going to move this forward fairly quickly. I think you'll see some developments that people just aren't aware of that will come to light in the near and midterm. Okay, so there's a lot going on, and we intend to move this very quickly.
Very good. Well, I'll be watching very carefully for sure. It is my largest holding, actually. I'm not sure if that's something that's wise for a 68-year-old guy to be doing, but it's not everything I own, but it's the largest single holding, and that I mention that only because I have confidence in Quinton's integrity and his abilities, and not only do I, but many of the people, his colleagues, his peers, speak very highly of you, Quinton, and I think that's another thing that you have going for you. But I really admire your work, and I wish you the best. You're heading back to Australia very, very shortly, I guess.
That's right. Tomorrow, heading back down. You bet.
Happy travels, safe travels, and we'll look forward to talking to you again sometime, hopefully in the near future.
Thanks very much, Jay.